For the first time ever, Locked On Wolverines has gone international. That's right. We are on the road. We are in the wonderful country of Canada, which Chris Balas here and I have liberated. This episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Saturday, as promised. We have a special guest this episode. We're going to have an extravaganza here in the international version. Well, it was international. We conquered Canada.
Yeah, we've liberated these people. We've got a couple guys back here that we're very happy to see us.
They treated us as liberators, at least.
They did, yeah.
Didn't really have a lot of resistance. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. This is the Wolverines senior editor, Chris Balas, joining us for the first time.
Yeah.
Clayton's come on a couple times.
Oh, has he really? He's gone on before me?
Because he begged.
Disappointing.
He
okay.
begged.
All right.
He doesn't want anyone to know that. He begged to come on.
I bet he did, yeah.
So we brought him on anyway and let him act like, you were an invited guest, Clayton. Welcome,
right.
You know. He was more like, well, you know, you know his face. Like,
hey, I'm just happy to be here, man. I got to tell you, how many times have we asked you to join us over the years? And you know, very few that I respect as much as you in the business, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I mean, that feeling goes one way. It goes this way to this way. No, it's I've said. I know you haven't watched. We don't usually watch each other's stuff. I do watch occasionally when I get it. You know, when it's not like a crazy hectic time. But if you watched the podcast or listened to the podcast, you would have heard many a time me saying I am a paid subscriber of the Wolverine.
Yeah, we love your posts on there on the message board and your interactions. Our subscribers love you, and it's been fantastic.
Except the ones who have no idea who I am, and then they're like, who's this doofus out there?
Then I outed you, and then everything changed, and we got so many more subscribers because of it. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Isaiah Hole hangs out here.
That's a lie, but I appreciate it. Nonetheless, so we've had a really busy week. It's the first week of full-on press conferences. I mean, the season is really here.
Yeah.
Since this is your first time, give me your kind of 30,000-foot view of what you kind of expect.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because I was just writing an article about the top 5 position groups, and I started it out by saying in the past this was an easier exercise because there were a couple that stood out, and then you had question marks about the other ones. And we had 4 Michigan guys here going back and forth that know the program pretty well. We're trying to figure out, okay, what's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and how do you leave out 6 and 7, right? If you got tight ends at 6, and you've got 2 guys that they love, and Colston Loveland and A.J. Barner, who has been fantastic, then it's pretty hard. But you've got star power. The thing that I've really noticed is you've got star power at every position, but then you've got the depth at every position like the 1990s. And speaking to people that have been around the program a long time, they said it's got that 1990s feel again where there's so much talent. But when you've got leaders like J.J. McCarthy and Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinter and Chris Jenkins, who are, you know what, your best leaders have to be your hardest workers is the cliche, and these guys are. It's so much fun. Blake Horam, for God's sake, Donovan Edwards, you know, I could go right down the list. And then you've got the young talent like Will Johnson, you've got Rod Moore, who nobody talks about, who is just a fantastic safety.
Might be the best safety in the country.
Yeah, and I think he's underrated, there's no question.
It's funny when you look at just like, you know, because that's the thing with no-star defense and things of that nature is that you get this situation where you've got all of these, players like Rod Moore might be the best safety in the country. He's not going to get the same type of hype as a guy from Clemson, a guy from Alabama, a guy from LSU. I mean, obviously the Southern schools get a lot of hype. I mean, heck, even the Ohio State gets a lot of hype, and you know, people look at like a guy like Lathan Ransom and say, "Oh, that's a really good guy," and then you see him out there on an island against Cornelius Johnson, and what happens, right? And so it's these Michigan guys, because they aren't necessarily stars, right? Like, it's a little bit different when they bring in a Dax Hill. Yeah. And then, you know, everyone knows who he is already because he was a 5-star.
Rashawn Gary.
Yeah.
I was going to say Rashawn Benny, Rashawn Gary. I was getting them mixed up, but yeah.
When you bring in someone that is already, you know, going to be on the national stage as a recruit, it's one thing. When you get a guy like Rod Moore, who's a 3-star, it's kind of the same thing as a guy like Kwity Paye, ends up going in the first round of the NFL draft, does not get those accolades while he's at Michigan necessarily, but he plays a lot better than what people think. That's why I always say, stars do matter. I'm not saying stars don't matter, but I always say you have these episodes where I'm like railing against the stargazers.
Yeah.
Because how many names can we count on at Michigan? We can say Kwity Paye, we can say Ronnie Bell. Ronnie Bell was ranked like 1,479th in the country.
Yep.
the only Power 5 offer he had was Michigan.
Right. Yep, and he was going to be a basketball player until they decided, hey, we're going to make you a football player. So I can go. David Ojabo was another one that came out of nowhere, and so many. Hassan Haskins was a guy, an afterthought to so many people. I think he was a 2-star at one point, and it's like, okay. And then he's the guy that really helps you beat Ohio State. So now you do need elite athletes, okay? Look, nobody's saying that you don't, but there is such a thing as good coaching, too, where you can take some of these guys. And that's the hope with a guy like Amorian Walker, for example, a cornerback who is an elite athlete. Can you coach him up into being an elite cornerback? And if anybody can, Steve Klingscale can, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing, too, I think, when you look at this Michigan team, it's not just the construction of the personnel, it's also the construction of the coaches.
Right.
I think this is the first time, and I there were certainly times in Jim Harbaugh's tenure you would look like when his first team, you looked at the group that he had, and on paper it was pretty incredible. You're like, oh, he's got, Greg Jackson, he comes in from the, a lot of these NFL guys. Greg Jackson, Jim Drevno's got that, NFL plus college, and you look at all of the guys that they brought in, you're like, yeah, this is going to be good, but it didn't end up necessarily working out because I think Jim just kind of didn't realize what you needed in the college level, and now you have that wonderful benefit of guys who understand the college game, that can coach the college game, can connect with guys who are more 18 to 22 compared to dealing with a multimillionaire, 32-year-old, and they can go out on the road and recruit as well. And even though some of these things haven't worked out very well, Steve Klingscale, for instance, obviously struck out on a lot of his big recruits, but the reason why Michigan was even in those recruitments, whereas before they wouldn't even have been in them, is because of Steve Klingscale. Right,
and on top of that, the NIL is making a huge difference in putting these guys behind the 8 ball. There's no question about it. That's a different conversation for a different day, and maybe you can have Clayton on your podcast to talk about that. But
Mr. NIL.
Yeah, but Steve Klingscale is an elite recruiter. Ron Bellamy is an elite recruiter, and that's something Jim Harbaugh, when he got back from the NFL, kind of had to learn all over again. He had all these NFL guys, and they still had aspirations maybe to get back to the league, and you still got a couple guys like that. I think Jesse Minter will be an NFL defensive coordinator, but he does his job so well as a coordinator that, he's such an asset right now. But guys like Jay Harbaugh, unbelievable recruiter. I can go right down the list. Mike Elston is one of the more prepared guys when it comes to identifying guys. And I'll give you an example. One of our subscribers had a kid that was interested in Michigan, and 3 days later he was on a visit because Mike Elston got word of it, and he said, all right, we want this kid up here. Boom, there he is. So whereas in the past, there might have been some lollygagging, I was going to use a different word, but to get there, and that's not the case anymore. So it's getting harder, but there's nobody frankly, that works harder on the trail than these guys. They deserve a little bit more respect than they're getting, and a little bit more success, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And before we move on, I do want to give a particular, not shout out, but moment of recognition for Jay Harbaugh.
Yes.
He's always been the Michigan's at worst second best recruiter, depending on, and obviously he and Partridge back, especially in 2016, 17, 18 were very much like, one's here, and they just kept on flipping back and forth. But I remember having these arguments with a lot of Michigan fans back in 2020-ish, and they were like, oh, Jay Harbaugh is an awful coach. And it's like, I don't understand where that was even coming from. You look at what he did with the tight ends, and it was phenomenal. He moves over to running backs, and I understand people wanted to see a different caliber of running back, but he elevated that position, and he also recognized as a recruiter, he went out and saw that, hey, a guy like Karan Higdon, a guy like, Chris Evans, obviously.
Hassan Haskins.
Yeah. And Michigan tried to keep, here's another inside baseball thing for you. Michigan tried to keep Hassan Haskins a secret. They found him, had basically no offers, and they told me straight up, they're like, we are trying to make sure we are not going to offer this guy until we know he's ready to commit, because we don't want anyone else to get wind of it.
You know what else they did with Frederick Moore this year? Ron Bellamy told me Frederick Moore was vastly underrated, and we saw in the spring game. So they're great identifiers of talent. You're right, Jay Harbaugh. We haven't even talked about his special teams impact. He's elite there. He's fantastic. And it's funny because I was talking about great recruiters. I didn't even talk about Partridge or Kirk Campbell, who's come in, with the gloves off and going after guys like Bryce Underwood. So there's not a weak link on this staff, and I hate quoting Urban Meyer, but I will when he said, I cannot have a coach on my staff that is not a great recruiter, and I won't. And I think Jim Harbaugh has kind of found that out after, in his 9th year here, that's something you have to have too.
Yeah, and he didn't have that. It was like 3 great guys, and then the rest were all coaches.
Right.
All right, we're going to continue talking here in just a moment. We're going to make this awkward since I don't have a computer in front of me, and we're going to tell you a little bit something about, once it's up here, FanDuel, which I know a lot of you are going to be out there using. It's something that I use. Football season's about to kick off, and whether you're looking at college, you're looking at pro, it's got all kinds of options for you. FanDuel's giving you the chance to win all season long, because right now when you go and bet on a Super Bowl winner, don't try to bet on Michigan as a Super Bowl winner. It literally does not work. You can get bonus bets back every time that they win in the regular season. So if you feel like the Lions are ready to do it, you can really, really win big there. So just pick any team to win the Super Bowl. You'll get bonus bets for every single victory. You can also use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and a heck of a lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, we are here in what is now the United States of America. I know it doesn't seem like it because a lot of people were calling this Canada for a long time, but thanks to Chris Balas and I coming up here, we in fact did conquer it. It is liberated.
At least this backyard portion.
Yeah, this yes. Little, at least like 4
But you got to start small. You know?
Yeah, exactly. We didn't bring any flags. Probably should have brought some flags and just staked it, and you know.
And thank you to Canada Mike and his beautiful wife Dee for hosting us.
Yes, absolutely. And they'll be joining over here later at the tail end, and you'll finally get to meet the people that I've been discussing at the near the end of every episode last week in preparation for coming here for our international business trip.
Yes.
I don't drink, but if I could, I would be having a margarita made in my mouth. So
I do, and I've been drinking for him.
Exactly. So
yeah.
It's if we look a little haggard, even me, if I don't drink, but if we look a little haggard,
we're up a little late last night.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's get into a little bit more of the specifics. You look at this schedule. Obviously, it's not going to be necessarily a daunting one. Certainly, Michigan gets a lot of guff for that. Georgia, for whatever reason, doesn't, and they're pretty much in the same boat. Michigan doesn't really necessarily have to be on, in my opinion, until that week 11, going to Penn State. But what are there problem areas that you look at, whether it's the schedule, whether it's the team? What do you identify as something that you're kind of maybe leery about going into the year?
Well, a few things. Every year, there are going to be games, whether it's Georgia or Michigan or Alabama, where you're not going to play your best game and you're going to get a scare maybe that you shouldn't have. And we go through the Michigan schedule if you want to, back to when Jim Harbaugh first got here, at Minnesota on October 31st on Halloween, when they probably should have lost that game if Minnesota doesn't follow it. Last year, Illinois, if not for Jake Moody, they don't beat Illinois, when Blake Corum gets hurt. So I'm looking at games at Minnesota, looking at a game at Nebraska, which is by far the best night atmosphere, and this includes Penn State with the whiteouts, that I have ever experienced in a football game a couple of years ago. That, I don't think that team's going to be great, but you know what? Sometimes you don't have to be great, and I will use Purdue and Iowa as examples when they just destroyed Ohio State a couple of years in a row, or a couple of years when Ohio State only had the one loss in the Big Ten. There are no guarantees, guys. Go to Michigan State, they're going to be coming for you as bad as they may be. They're going to be biting ankles and stuff like that, as Dan Campbell would like to say, and so there's always a concern. Maryland before Ohio State, right?
That's my biggest trap game of the year. It's not even a trap game. You got Josh Gaddis there.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, he has an axe to grind, even though Michigan gave him that shot.
Right.
And he's the one who bailed, and Michigan would have welcomed him back, but he decided, because he wasn't going to be that next head coach, that he was going to go and was going to have some parting shots on his way out. Didn't even say bye to me. It really hurt my feelings.
You okay?
No, I'm when I see him, he better not be like, hey, I'll be like,
right.
Bro, you didn't even say goodbye.
Right.
You didn't even say goodbye.
It's me, Isaiah. Do you remember him?
Mike McDonald got an NFL job.
Yeah.
A defensive coordinator. He said goodbye. I didn't really even know Mike McDonald.
Right, yeah.
But I digress.
Okay, it's all right. It's going to be okay.
It hurts.
Well, you're going to get a chance to see him probably after the game or before, with Maryland. And but you know what? They got a great quarterback. They got great receivers, usually. And you've seen what they've done to Ohio State a couple of times, taking them to the wire before that Michigan game. Now it's the roles are reversed. Michigan's playing Maryland before they play Ohio State. That's a dangerous team. I still think Michigan will win. The one thing is about these guys is the leadership is not going to allow them to overlook anybody, and that's really kind of what makes you feel really good about it.
And I think one of the things I always say, you play great games for a reason, right? People like to always look at it. Now Georgia, Ohio State, they usually go out there and beat the teams that they're supposed to beat.
Right.
but it doesn't always work out that way, even for those teams that are excellent, right? We saw last year, Georgia went out there and struggled with a not good Mizzou team.
Right.
Ended up being a believable team around the right there on the precipice of it by the season's end, but they had to go down to the wire. Ohio State lost to a bad Iowa team.
Yeah.
Ohio State lost to a mediocre Purdue team.
Right.
It happens sometimes when teams have your number. Now, that said, you look at this Michigan schedule, I am leery of Nebraska because we don't know what Matt Rule is what he's gonna be like, and he's gonna have this circled on his calendar.
Of course.
This is going to tell us who we are.
Yep.
Minnesota, I'm a little bit less leery of than I would be just because they lost so much. But, I mean, you still think about a couple years ago when Mo Ibrahim got hurt. They were still trotting out running backs out there that were still rushing for 300 yards.
And they've got like 8 or 9 guys on preseason All Big Ten teams, so it's not like they don't have talent. You know, PJ Fleck can coach a little bit. As annoying as this guy might be,
well, he's doing elite today.
He's what?
He's doing elite.
Okay, yeah. But you just never know who it's going to be. I mean, Rutgers has given Michigan games for 3/4 of games here in the last 2 years, where Michigan had to pull one out a couple of years ago, and nobody would have predicted that. So you just never know if you've got a couple of injuries and maybe you're not feeling it that day or something like that. A couple breaks go the other team's way early in a game, then you can be in a dogfight. So you know what? And as far as the national pundits with the Michigan was always playing hard teams and tougher teams in the non-conference. And where did it get them? You know what? Nowhere. The teams that were playing the easier games were going undefeated, and they were up there at the end of the year being higher ranked. So no excuses, man. No apologies.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it behooves a lot of teams to be able to just get there. Right?
Yeah.
Like instead of worrying about it. That said, I mean, obviously we would like to see the better matchups, the better games, just from a weekly standpoint, because it'd just be more fun.
Right.
And I commend Alabama. Have you seen Alabama's non-conference schedule through like 2036?
No.
It is insane.
Okay.
No other team has been as aggressive as scheduling on. We'll see if it holds. Right?
Yeah. Well, with all the new conference realignment and stuff like that. But for example, next year's schedule, you remember the Big Ten did a big release on it. Now we're gonna have to change it all over again. We're gonna get another Big Ten show on the schedule for next year with Oregon and Washington.
Yeah. So things definitely changed, but Alabama's got some they do it. They instead of having just that neutral site game.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Alabama's been good about having usually a pretty good neutral site opponent to start off the year. They started doing home and homes.
And good for them. I miss those. And you're going to be able to do more of them now that they're expanding the playoff. And you can get into a playoff with 2 losses. You know what? And I think it'll be 16 eventually is where it will land for the playoffs, which is probably where it should be. And then maybe you even have a 3-loss team, sneak in there or something like that. So a lot of more people, I think, are going to be starting to play harder games.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I mean, if this is the way they're going, then give us the better matchups.
100%.
Don't I prefer the 4-team format. I like the exclusivity. But if you're going to expand it and we're going to have all this conference realignment and all of this, then give me the better games.
Yeah.
And that means that you can relegate Rutgers to playing itself, and then you can have I'd like to see Michigan, Florida State.
Yes.
I'd like to see teams like that. Michigan, LSU. We have literally never seen it.
I know. Wouldn't you love to go to a game at LSU at Baton Rouge, man? Unbelievable.
I would love to have them up in December.
Yeah.
I don't,
December.
Yeah. I don't want to be on the sidelines for that.
No.
It'd be cold. But they wouldn't want to be there either, which is kind of the great part of it.
Exactly.
If you could schedule any team, right now you could say like
home.
Yeah, home and home. Who would it be?
Yeah, well, Texas, and we're going to see that. I love that. I love the fact that these tradition-rich schools, I'd love to go down there. And part of it's me being selfish and wanting to see some of these venues. When we went out to Oregon in 2003, that was awesome. I can't wait to go to see Michigan, USC. But you mentioned LSU. I think that would be unbelievable. And, I was talking to some former players who played at South Carolina in 1985, and they said it was a different atmosphere. They played 2001: A Space Odyssey music. They had smoke coming out, and then they kicked their ass. But I'm sorry, on national TV. And but you'd love to see that. You just to feel it. When the Richter scale is picking up the noise in the LSU, and that would be unbelievable. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
It's still wild that they've never played these two-story programs, and they still have never
like
played.
A Citrus Bowl or something. You would have think that it would happen.
Yeah, and it just hasn't.
No.
All right, so we'll wrap up here in a moment with Chris Balas and bring on the Canadians. One of them is an adopted Canadian. She was actually from Florida, and she was stolen, trafficked over the border.
Mike.
Yeah, and it's absolutely ridiculous. We'll also bring on Ben Fiser, who will join us as well. But before we do, I need to know, what's your prediction for the season? How do you see the season going?
Yeah, I was the only one actually in our football preview at the Wolverine that picked 11-1, and just because it's so hard to go through a season undefeated, I could see them losing at Penn State. I don't think Penn State's great, and everybody's like, well, what makes you think after what they did last year? Because last year has no bearing on this year, and A, B, every time you go up to Penn State, it's a tough game. So if there were one that I was going to pick them to lose, that would be the one. So I have them going 11-1, but still beating Ohio State, still winning a tiebreaker, going to the Big Ten championship game, winning it, and going to a playoff.
I still haven't put it up on my prediction, I don't think, for finally what I think is going to happen. I think I'm actually leaning to going to undefeated. I've yet to predict Michigan to go undefeated. I've always said exactly what you said. It's hard to go undefeated in the regular season. I don't think that they'll have some scares. I don't think that they'll have any real challenges up until Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State. I think those 3 games are going to be tough. I think Michigan State will be tough for probably a half or so. But this is one of the things that I said last night when we were all hanging out by the fire. A lot of these teams, or not a lot of these teams, but you look at Michigan State and you see their fans saying, like, we're going to go get them because of what happened last year. Listen, just because the fan base has a very faulty idea of what happened in that stadium tunnel, those players know on both sides what actually happened.
Right.
Michigan's going to come out and be very angry. Michigan State can try to manufacture some anger, but Michigan's going to be legitimately angry. And
talent usually wins out in the end.
Yeah.
So most of the time.
Yeah, and I do think that Michigan will beat Ohio State. I think I'm not saying that it's impossible for Ohio State to win. Of course, that is the most talented on paper team in the conference. It's one of the 3 most talented on paper teams in the country.
Yep.
But I said it going into last year's game. If Michigan wins this one, they will win the next one because the tides have turned and you get in your head a little bit.
Right here.
Yeah.
Ryan Day, the pressure's on, and you hear him talking at media day, and he's saying, well, we did this, this is why we lost, because we tried to do this, and then, we need to do this, and with the same stuff I heard from one year to the next, and then they got their butts kicked again. So it's definitely in their heads. I bet they played a little bit closer to the vest in this game, though, without the quarterback, without a C.J. Stroud out there, and you see more of a traditional, knockdown, drag-out Big Ten fight, and they're going to try to match Michigan in the ground. I don't think that's beneficial for them either, frankly.
It's like Zach Zinter said this week.
Yeah.
It's, they can sit there and say, like, we're going to do things to match Michigan, but we're already ahead of them because we've already been doing it.
Right.
And so they have to play catch-up. So it's hard to play catch-up to do the same thing, to say we're going to be more physical. Okay, you might get more physical.
Right.
Michigan was already more physical, and they just added to it.
Right. And make no mistake, Ohio State is a very, very good football team, very capable of coming into Ann Arbor and winning if Michigan doesn't play a good game. But the good news is that Michigan's playing its best games now against Ohio State, and you know what? It's been a long, long time since that has happened regularly. It feels like old times, and it feels pretty darn good.
Absolutely. Chris Balas,
a pleasure,
thanks for joining.
Anytime.
Go to Wolverine.com at On3. Join up like I have. Like I said, I'm a paid subscriber. I can give you no better endorsement than that. Clayton said I could account you. I'm like, I wanted to pay so I could come on here and say that I paid for it.
Appreciate it. So we always appreciate the support, and you know how much we appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. All right, we're going to be back with some Canadians that have reluctantly become Americans thanks to us coming and liberating them. Stay tuned for that in a moment. They greeted us as liberators, but one is being very reluctant. Our hosts, I know it's a different thing. This is like Big Ten Network on site. We're on site here. We have she used to be American, and then she became a Canadian, and now, as of yesterday, when Chris Ballison arrived, she is an American again. And then, hey, buddy, how you doing over there?
Pretty good, eh?
All right, hey, good, buddy. Good, thanks, guy. We've got Mike Weiss and Danielle Weiss here with us. You've heard me talk about the Canadians on the show over the last week, and they are here. Thank you for hosting us.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. And this is just an absolute amazing soiree that you've created, and I appreciate that you let us come and take over your country as well. And don't like the reluctance.
This is my little protest shirt.
So, all right. So let's. I want to actually discuss. You guys have an interesting story.
We do.
Because you were living in Florida.
Gainesville.
Yeah, and so which is, if you don't know, which I'm sure you do, is home of the Florida Gators. But you were not a Florida Gators fan.
No.
You were a Michigan fan.
Yes.
You were in Canada,
Yes.
The app formerly known as Canada, and you were a Michigan fan.
Correct, yeah.
So how did this come together, this union?
Tailgating. Michigan football brought us together a long time ago.
Yeah, we met each other probably 8 years before we started dating at a Michigan Notre Dame game.
Yep.
And we were both dating people at the time, and I really thought it was great that Danielle knew so much about Michigan football and was so passionate, and her sisters as well. And fast forward to the month before Michigan played Alabama in Dallas, we started texting each other, and we both happened to be single, so I invited her to the game, and as a gentleman said, you can, stay in your own bed, and, I'd love to have you as a guest. And we just really hit it off, and it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Michigan football and our tailgate friends, and it became a pretty special thing, and now we have 2 kids because of Michigan football.
So Michigan, if you're listening to this, and I hope you're not generally, because I'm sharing stuff you probably don't want me to half the time, you owe them child support.
We would love to take it.
We'd like our seat donation back.
Yeah, so that's, I think, only fair, but it's interesting how Michigan brings people together. I mean, that's how I also know the two of you.
Yeah.
Not to make this an entire show for On3 and the Wolverine.com, but I met you two through Chris Balas.
Correct, yeah.
And going to the 2021 Big Ten Championship game, and then we then get to go on and forge a friendship from there and talk about the shows we like and what hosts we like, what hosts we don't like.
We'll keep that a secret.
Yeah, we'll keep that a secret right now.
Don't need anyone coming after me.
Yeah. So let's just really get into it then. Like, who's the host who's the writer in Michigan football you hate the most, and what is the worst secret that you have? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, God.
Well, so you both give me your predictions. What do you think is going to happen this year? Do you think, are there any games on there that you're afraid of? They follow just as closely as literally I do, and I'm in the building. Mike, we'll start with you. How do you think this year's going to go for Michigan?
I may sound like a homer, but I do think we are going to go undefeated in the regular season, and I might as well just say straight through the season to become national champions. I think we have everything you need to be a national champion. And what would normally concern me the most would be the Maryland game. I think everybody's talking about Penn State and how good they could be. We know Ohio State. We want to go into Michigan State and really get some redemption for some of the things that happened off the field last year. But Maryland is a game that normally would concern me right before we play Ohio State. It's on the road. But I think this team has the mental fortitude to not let that be overlooked. I think they learned from Illinois last year. And I think they go strong all year and become national champions.
All right, D.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of what Mike said. I agree. I will say Penn State scares me. I think they'll handle business with Maryland. I think we kill Ohio State again. And this is the year. The team has it, and I think we'll be in Houston for the national championship.
And yeah, just to jump in one more thing. If they needed any more motivation, I think what the NCAA is doing with Burgergate, I think that just gives them that extra motivation to ride or die for their coach to politely say, you know what, to the NCAA, for coming down on something that, they wouldn't do with other schools. And so I really think we have everything going in our way. The one concern I obviously have, and I knock on wood, is injuries. But mentally, I think this team is stronger than they've ever been, and I don't see us losing a game.
Yeah, the injuries is the only thing that I'm personally concerned about. I do think that Michigan has everything it needs to do what it wants to do. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. Guys, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for hosting me, hosting us, hosting the podcast.
Yeah.
And let's. I'll have to go and figure out if my credit card will work later, since it wasn't working earlier, because I'm gonna have to get this one out of jail later.
That's Canadian dollars.
Dude, they call them police or they call them Mounties. That's the thing. I see police on everything, but
we have a little bit of both.
we
like to confuse people.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Is it in French too?
May we?
Can I just be friendly and do I need to use my card? Can I just be like, hey, just let him out, please?
Yeah, I think that works. That does work. Yeah.
All right, we're going to be back with Ben Fiser here in just a second. All right, we got Ben Fiser with us. Now, Ben, you have an interesting predicament, and I love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
For those who aren't watching, you're listening. He is wearing a shirt that shows off the flag being planted in the Block O at Ohio State and has the score underneath. But you actually live in Ohio.
Yes.
What is that like for you as a Michigan fan?
It is, it's very tough, because you're always hearing it from all the people down there. They only like to talk about recent history. Mm-hmm. If you go back, we're obviously beating them in the overall record, but that doesn't count. It's only, recent. Mm-hmm. So, very tough, yes.
So, when was the last? Did you go to the game last year, or how did you even consider going? Obviously, it's hard to want to go to Columbus.
It's always So I did not go to the game last year. I watched it with a group of friends up in Michigan. Actually, it's something I've been down there before for tailgating. It's not an experience that it's something I don't want to think I want to voluntarily put myself through. That's for sure.
Now, is it easier now than it was, say, 5 years ago?
Much easier, and I feel like we're building some momentum, and it wasn't a fluke, and so I'm gaining confidence daily, but I'm also maintaining just respect. So
what kind of things do they say to you now, Ohio State fans, when obviously you wear Michigan proudly on your chest? You say it with your chest, as Rich Eisen would say.
Yes.
What kind of things do they say to you now?
So it's funny. One of the things I remember often, a former boss of mine, he's a huge Buckeye fan. He's just glad we're making it competitive again. So mm-hmm. it brings great joy to me to hear that. So
I feel like that is the type of thing that a sore loser kind of says to try to it's probably not too dissimilar to the types of things that now Michigan. Let's just be fair. Michigan won the 2016 game. They just gave Ohio State an extra shot, but it is the type of thing that some of us would say, even me in the media. I had not killed my fandom at that point. It still irks me to this day, but sounds like the type of thing a sore loser would say is, what's your excuse? How can you make yourself feel better?
And I don't know, I'm kind of veering off, but back to another thing that they would say is, oh, you sure you don't want to join us now? And I think that's something maybe a Buckeye would do as they start getting beat, over the years. But, as a true blue Michigan Wolverine, you're always there for your team.
All right, I'm going to let you keep getting set up for this soiree. But here in America, let's just be honest, also an American, we might not like Ohio, even though he lives there, but it's still America. And this right here is also America. It is no longer Canada. Don't let that rat fink over there fool you. This is America. And this is an American show. It was international, but now it's local. Now it's domestic. Locked On Wolverines podcast. Thank you to Ben Fiser. Thank you to the Weisses. Thank you to Chris Balas. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.